Analysis. My name is Isabella.
And I'm Annabella.
And this is a podcast where we talk about the growth of America, where we've come from, and where we're going.
Alrighty, so on today's episode, we are diving deep into cultural development after World War II. Let's get started.
Real quick, before we do, we're very excited to be partnering this week with Nova Home, an amazing company that has just launched their newest product.
It's a large multi-pocket canvas tote bag. I think this is such a great tool for any student listening and anyone else in need of a good bag.
It's good for girls and guys and can be used for absolutely anything. Students, teachers, nurses, travel, overall work, it could even be a gym bag.
Yeah, you guys can go ahead and check it out on TikTok Shop. For this steal, only $5.99. You can enter to win one for free by subscribing to our podcast on all platforms.
Yep, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and more. Have you ever wondered why a lot of houses in neighborhoods today are so close together?
I don't know, hasn't it always just been like that?
I mean, I guess so. It's something that my mom complains about all the time because she wants more garden space. But looking back in history, you can actually thank William J. Levitt for it. He's the one that kind of started the idea of suburbs. And that development, along with others, is kind of what we're going to focus on today and the cultural effects that brought and the changes for, people's society.
Yeah, and some important people to mention while we talk about World War II are President Dwight D. Eisenhower, Elvis Presley, and even Marilyn Monroe. To understand it all, let's get started. Yeah, so even though the war started in 1939, we actually didn't join until someone attacked us on our own home soil.
Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah, in the mid-1940s, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in the attempt to take out our entire naval fleet. I mean, if it would have worked, it would have been a genius strategy.
Yeah.
Because we would have been totally out of commission for the rest of the war. We really didn't want to get started unless someone else made us. Because after World War I, our economy was not doing too hot. I mean, it really needed some help.
Yeah, and I feel like our government was really good about protecting the citizens. They didn't want to get involved in the war if it only meant hurting us.
Yeah, and you can't really send a country to war without the motivation of the people. After Pearl Harbor, people were fired up to get started and to really defend our nation. That's partially what helped us win.
Absolutely.
You want to know something funny?
Yeah, what?
So, our next topic, which is going to be Lyndon B. Johnson and the Great Society, he was actually elected in 1960. But formerly, President Abraham Lincoln, he was elected in 1860. Kind of a fun fact.
Oh, yeah, that is.
Yeah.
All right, so what about the Great Society? What kind of change did that make for our country?
So one of the biggest things that Great Society did was it introduced the Social Security program to the United States.
What's that?
It was a piece of social welfare legislation which aimed to help people in poverty and those struggling. It provided hospital care for the elderly and also continued to enforce the Civil Rights Act.
The Civil Rights Act, that was a really big deal, and it did a lot for our society as a whole. 1964 was a big thing with the Civil Rights Act, and it basically eliminated all of the barriers when it comes to the right to vote. In the very next year, in 1965, the Housing and Urban Development Act was passed, which created and provided funds for people so that we could have more affordable housing. And we see that show up a lot with Levitt's idea for suburbs. One of the other advancements that happened in this time that didn't necessarily happen through the Great Society, but was just kind of evolution overall, was the development of a lot of technologies. So when you combine that with the creation of the suburbs, what happened is this country became very united in a good way because we want to have this American dream that was developed, but we lost a sense of uniqueness, if you will. So one of these major technological advancements I'm talking about is the television. When the television was introduced, there was a TV show that aired all across the country called I Love Lucy. This TV program showed what the American dream looked like and what supposedly all Americans were up to. What their houses looked like, the type of jobs they had, what the parents did, kids going to school, things like that. What we see, though, is that there were some people that felt they weren't included in that, and other people that thought they sort of looked like what happened on TV, but not enough. And so everyone felt like they had to be this sort of image. And I think that is a standard that started a lot of this major shift in American culture in this time, and technology had a really big thing to do with it.
Yeah, and along those same lines of some people not being represented, the most underrepresented group was the African Americans in this time. though there were some amendments passed, like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, it's still, people found ways to still segregate and still discriminate. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting. This helped them gain more representation, but not enough for it to be equal. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, also known as the Fair Housing Act, prohibited discrimination in housing. It was often seen that the suburbs of America were almost completely white. There was no rule or law saying that they couldn't be there, but there was very much intimidation from the people that already lived there to not let African Americans move in.
Unfortunately, we love to think of our country as this just amazing, wonderful America, right? But there was definitely a time, specifically right now, that racism was almost just allowed and normalized. And that's something that we definitely needed to change, which a lot of people saw. And that's kind of where this culture shift happened a little bit, because people saw that that wasn't fair and started to fight for it.
And along with racism, we also saw a lot more discrimination on women. Even though we had already given them the right to vote, we thought that that was new and revolutionary. However, there was also a second wave of feminism that expanded during this time. There was a big push for equal pay and opportunities, like Title IX, that prohibited sex discrimination in federally funded education programs, and also pushed for reproductive rights with the creation of the birth control pill, and also the passage of Roe v. Wade in 1973. Some influential women from this time included Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem. Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique and also helped co-found NOW, which is the National Organization for Women. Gloria Steinem was a journalist and activist and really became the leader of this wave of new feminism in the 1970s. We also see Marilyn Monroe, who embraced her sexuality as a part of the sexual revolution of the time and used it as power to fight against the men who are really just generalizing her as an actress.
You're right. All of these women really did become such influential figures to young women of the time, because a lot of these young women were just seeing their moms be at home and cook in the kitchen and take care of the kids, and they wanted to be able to do more. So they looked on TV and in newspapers at these crazy women that were really not following the norms of society to do what they wanted, and they saw a change in what their future could look like. They saw the different possibilities that they had, and they could actually dream a little bit. And we see these influential figures in all different sides of history.
In connection to the Montgomery bus boycott done by Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr. was actually selected as a part of the association which organized the boycott. The boycott lasted for almost a year, and it really showed everyone's resilience for the matter. And in 1963, there was a March on Washington by Martin Luther King Jr. and all of his supporters, and that is where he delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech.
There was a key figure that really spoke out against this in this time. I think we all know her and love her, and that is Rosa Parks. She started the Montgomery bus boycott because, if we all remember the story, she did not give up her seat at the front of the bus for a white man because she believed she didn't have to. It was her right that she could sit on the bus wherever she wanted. So what happened after that is a lot of people stopped taking the buses, and the city lost money for it. So that was a big boycott that kind of gave the country an idea of what was happening in the middle and lower classes, and they could kind of see what was happening to a majority of their citizens.
All of Martin Luther King Jr.'s demonstrations, like his March on Washington, were all peaceful. They were non-violent. This is because they were inspired by people like Gandhi, who had done it before, and also Christian teachings. And we all think that this part of our history is so far in our past, we've come a really far way. And though we have progressed as a nation, my dad was 14 years old when Martin Luther King was assassinated in Tennessee.
Yeah, it really isn't as far back as we all think. I think some of the issues that citizens struggled with in society in the 50s and 60s is still what we struggle with today. It just looks different. Today we kind of see how there are people following trends and they want to make something new and create something different than what's already been done. Some for economic reasons. They think that what was done in the generation before us wasn't good and we need to change it for valid reasons. But the same with our culture. There were a lot of people thinking that they needed to change. And this is where I can introduce counterculture, something that we saw in the 50s and 60s that is very similar to what we see today. There was I Love Lucy, like we talked about, that families and the nuclear family looked very similar all across the country. But these kids, as they grew up and became teenagers, realized that they had something within them that made them want to be different from others. And that's valid. I think we were all created to be individual people. So there was a major name that kind of started this counterculture movement, and that was Elvis Presley. He was considered the king of rock and roll, and he actually kind of started it. Rock and roll was created with him and a couple other artists of this time by connecting a bunch of different types of music and creating something completely new. He showed black music a lot more in the country, which became a major transition for people. And even with that, they had the start to hip-hop too. He merged black rhythm and blues with white country and gospel and creating something called an electrifying sound. That's what they would say. Along with that, we see the hippies. This is something too where people were wearing suits to go to work, all these guys with their briefcases, and there were teenage kids that thought that was crazy and they wanted to express their own fashion sense.
Yeah, I know someone who went to Woodstock, my grandma.
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. People really just wanted to express themselves, and that's a lot of what we saw here. While people fought for their fashion sense and their right to listen to whatever music that they liked, even if their parents didn't like it, something else that these kids fought for in counterculture were gender norms. Women were stuck at home and they had this idea that they had to just be a housewife, and they wanted to work. They wanted to go out and use their brains for something other than doing dishes.
Yeah, on the personal side again, my grandma, when she was growing up younger, she went to public school, and girls were not allowed to wear anything other than long skirts. They weren't allowed to play with the boys. They weren't allowed to play sports. And even though her dad was a professor at Cornell, an Ivy League school, she wasn't allowed to go. She wasn't offered acceptance. She wasn't offered anything.
Women weren't known to be smart, and I think that's so unfair.
And I'm glad it's changing.
Seriously. At the same time, we see the baby boom. So with this idea of a nuclear family, to have a family, you kind of have to have kids. So here we are with the baby boom. Kids coming in left and right. Both my parents were baby boomers. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is kind of crazy.
But what's interesting is at the exact same time were a rise in divorce rates. I think people kind of saw after a while that this idea of a mom staying home and a dad going to work didn't really work because you need two parents to raise children.
Yeah, women finally saw that they could have a way out, and once it got later into the 60s, 70s, even 80s, women realized they could go get a job and they could support themselves, and it really allowed them to do so.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that we can relate to now as high schoolers learning about all of this history is the fact that for us to really figure out who we are and to grow in ourselves, we need to learn from both parents. So having the dad never home and at work all the time just wasn't beneficial. You needed a balance, and that's something that our country started to learn after a little while.
To sum it up, we can really say that the culture of this time period went for a roller coaster ride. I mean, from right after World War II with the economic boom and the creation of the suburbs to the traditional family values coming from that baby boom, we quickly went into conformity from all the Cold War anxiety, the civil rights movement, the youth rebellion and counterculture, as well as feminism, finally, in the later years.
Finally. We're running out of time here today, but next episode we're going to kind of talk about some other areas in this time where the country really wanted to keep going with that idea of changing and evolving. We're going to talk about how we entered into the space race with some other countries in this world, and we had some movements environmentally. We developed Earth Day, which was pretty cool, and some other things like that, so stay tuned. All right, guys, this has been Isabella
And Annabelle
on Annabella's American Analysis. Come back for more knowledge about our country's history next week.